Hello and thank you for joining me again. Well, I'm sure you'll know by the title of this video that this time round I'm going to take you on a tour of some of the mysterious locations in my home county of Lincolnshire. Now, Lincolnshire's ghosts and legends are largely unknown outside of its market towns and rural hamlets. So let's go and explore some of the many supernatural locations that Lincolnshire has to offer. This is Gumby Hall, situated on the edge of the Lincolnshire Wolds. It was built in 1700 for Sir William Massingberd on the site of a small manor house that had once belonged to a family called Gumby. Tennyson described the hall as a haunt of ancient peace, and it was home to the Massingberd family for over 250 years before being transferred to the National Trust. The hall stands in a 100-acre park with informal gardens, and like many old houses, Gumby Hall is said to have a resident ghost. Legend has it that the daughter of Sir William Massingberd fell in love with Sir William's coachman, and the couple planned to elope. But on the night the couple intended to flee, Sir William hid in waiting and shot the coachman dead. The servant's body was dragged through the grounds and thrown into this pond, and the ghost of the murdered man is said to haunt the pond and the pathway of the hall. Some versions of the story say that Sir William was so enraged that he also shot his daughter, which would account for reports of a ghostly couple seen haunting the path by the pond, now known as the Ghost Walk. Doddington Hall, a mansion situated just outside the city of Lincoln, was completed in 1600 by Robert Smithson, one of England's foremost architects. Although the exterior has never been changed, the house was completely redesigned and refurbished in 1761 and now contains a marvellous collection of ceramics, furniture and tapestries that reflect 400 years of unbroken family occupation. And the house is no stranger to ghostly goings-on. There is a legend of a screaming girl who on the anniversary of her brutal death can be seen falling from the roof of Doddington Hall. The story goes that she was a young servant trying to elude her lustful master, but she lost her footing and plunged to her death. However, a former owner of the house dismissed the legend as pure Victorian romantic fiction. But his wife had seen the real ghost known as the Brown Lady, looking at her from an upstairs landing. The ghost is said to particularly haunt newly married women who visit the hall, and she appears in the bedroom while the bride is alone and sits smiling at the woman as if giving her blessing. She wears a long brown dress and is said to give a feeling of peace and calm to those who see her, but nobody seems to have any idea as to her identity. This is the Vine Hotel, situated in the resort town of Skegness. It was built in the late 18th century, where it soon became a favourite hangout for local smugglers, and many a dark deed was committed here. There is a mystery surrounding the disappearance of a customs officer who was sent to the Vine to check through the accounts. He certainly arrived at the inn, but disappeared, and he was never seen alive again. In 1902, extensive building work was carried out at the Vine, and as builders ripped out dividing walls, they found a skeleton, still clad in the uniform of a customs officer. The skeleton was estimated to be 150 years old, and was thought to be the missing customs officer, who had evidently been murdered by smugglers, and to hide the crime they had buried him in the wall. The remains of the unfortunate man were found in the wall to the left of the reception area, and it is said that his ghost still haunts the building. Members of staff have reported seeing the apparition of a man here on the stairs and in room 8, directly above the place where he was bricked up. There is also the ghost of a woman seen wandering aimlessly through various rooms. Room 21 in particular. It is thought to be the ghost of Mrs. Durham, who was a former owner of the Vine Hotel. Staff had often heard phantom piano music, and the ghosts of a woman and her baby have been seen in the Tennyson Lounge. The ghost of Alfred Lord Tennyson himself has been seen by staff wandering around the gardens, walking his 2 dogs. While in residence here during the early 19th century, he could often be found leaning against a certain tree. It is said that Maud, one of his most famous pieces, was born from the influences of this garden and was generated from the peace and tranquility it provided. Unfortunately, the tree fell victim to Dutch elm disease, and a plaque next to the tree stump read, "Falling victim to Dutch elm, the remains of this tree bear credence to Lord Alfred Tennyson's favouring the Vine Hotel and its gardens." However, the once lovely gardens and the old world charm of the Vine has now gone. It is now a wedding venue. The Old Rectory in Epworth, situated in the Isle of Axholme, North Lincolnshire, is not only the setting for one of the best known hauntings in Lincolnshire, but also one of the most famous hauntings in England. From 1677 to 1735, the rectory was home to Samuel and Susanna Wesley and their 19 children, including John and Charles Wesley, who went on to form the Methodist movement. Reports of something strange happening in the rectory began on the morning of the 1st of December 1716, when the children and a maid heard terrible moaning coming from the attic, knocking on the bedroom walls, and heavy footsteps running up and down the stairs at all hours of the night, with nothing to account for them. As the noises grew louder, Samuel Wesley began to fear for the safety of his family. One night, when a knocking on the nursery door was particularly loud, he lost his temper and shouted, "Leave my family alone!" and challenged the ghost to meet him in his study. The ghost obliged and gave a resounding knock on his study door, and he was pushed by an unseen force against his desk. The Wesleys' 4th eldest daughter, Hetty, nicknamed the spirit Old Geoffrey, believing it to be the ghost of a former caretaker who had died in the house. One of the children even claimed to have seen him, a man in a long white cloak, while others claimed to have seen an animal resembling a badger coming out from under their beds. Then, in the March of 1716, the whole incident suddenly stopped as abruptly as it had started. But the experience with the supernatural left a lasting impression on John Wesley. He wrote in his journal in 1768, "With my latest breath I will bear testimony against giving up to the infidels one great proof of the invisible world. I mean that of witchcraft and apparitions, confirmed by the testimony of all ages." The Old Rectory is now the property of the Methodist Church of Great Britain and is open to the public as a museum. Although the haunting of the rectory stopped centuries ago, visitors still claim to hear the occasional knock on the wall or disembodied moan in the uppermost chamber of the house. Herby-on-Humber is a small village near Grimsby in north-east Lincolnshire. This historic village is surrounded by beautiful countryside, woodlands and rolling chalk hills. From the church across the busy main road is a lane through the fields which continues, so local legend has it, into haunted country. The story goes that on the evening of the 1st of November 1455, Rosamund Guy and Neville Randall, a young couple betrothed to be married, went for a walk into the Herby Dale woods. What went wrong that evening is not known, but it is widely thought that after a terrible quarrel, the man killed his fiancée and fled from the parish. The parents, in their grief and anger, cursed him and swore that unless he was brought to justice, their daughter's ghost would haunt the Herby Dale woods for 500 years. For centuries, the villagers would be disturbed by hideous screams emanating from the woods at night. It was also said that whenever farm horses passed the scene of the murder, they would always shy away in terror. The ghost of the murdered girl, dressed in her white wedding dress, walked in the Herby Dale woods near the site of the ancient oak where the quarrel took place. Although other couples have carved their initials and had them recovered when the bark grew over them, the initials of Rosamund Guy and Neville Randall have never been covered. Today the ancient tree no longer stands, and the tragic ghost no longer walks Herby Dale. But there is no doubt that the woods have a certain atmosphere, especially when visited at dusk, when the shadows are lengthening. This is Hubard Hills, a beauty spot near the market town of Louth, and it's also the setting for a tragic ghost story. The story goes that a woman walking in the Hubard Hills lost her terrier down a rabbit warren. She desperately tried to rescue the dog when a Scottish soldier from Stirling, out walking, came to help. Unfortunately, the dog could not be saved, but the pair got on very well and later fell in love. It was the time of the Great War, and the soldier, who was in the Black Watch Regiment, was called to the Western Front. He survived a German gas attack and returned to Louth, bringing with him a new dog for the girl, and shortly they were married. The couple had many happy years together, but the soldier outlived his bride, passing away well into his 90s. Since his death, people have reported seeing the ghost of a Scottish soldier in full uniform walking his dog. The apparition of the soldier appears on the top of the hill, and it is said not to look ghostly, but like an old film being replayed on a television set. And dogs will not go past a certain spot, which is said to be the place where the soldier met the girl looking for her dog. There are many strange supernatural creatures in the annals of Lincolnshire folklore. One of the most persistent is the shagfoal, a malevolent spectral creature with eyes like burning coals, described as a cross between a black dog and a horse. As mentioned in previous videos, Freeston near Boston and a railway bridge in the village of Digby were said to be haunted by the shagfoal. And according to legend, the churchyard of St Helens in Barnleby-le-Bec and the fields surrounding the village are haunted by a shagfoal said to make the most unearthly screams. But perhaps the strangest creature of all is said to haunt the River Trent. According to local folklore, this sharp bend in the River Trent, known as Jenny Herne between Wildsworth and Owerston Ferry near Scunthorpe, was once haunted by a most bizarre creature. The apparition took at least two forms: a pygmy with long hair and the face of a seal that occasionally crossed the river from the eastern to the western side in a small boat resembling a large pie dish. Others described the creature as having large eyes and long hair and tusks like a walrus, and it crawled out of the water to feed in nearby fields. This strange apparition was known as the Jinny on Boggard, and in times gone by this section of the river was avoided by local people on account of the creature. The keelmen who worked on the large boats could relate strange tales of feeling bumps at the side of their keels when anchored at the haunted bend in the river awaiting the turn of the tide. And few keelmen cared to anchor in the bend at night if they could avoid it. This strange belief possibly derives from the water spirits of Viking mythology, most notably the Nyx, a water spirit that assumes various forms but usually appears as half human and half fish. A short distance from Jenny Herne, there is an opening in the bank at the end of a lane known as Commonpeace Lane. This spot is said to be haunted by a gigantic white cat, nearly as large as a pig. The creature was commonly seen at the end of the 19th century, and it was seen to cross the road from the river and run through the opening in the bank. According to Lincolnshire folklorist Ethel Rudkin, in her book Lincolnshire Folklore, a Wesleyan preacher on the road one snowy night swore that he distinctly saw the cat, which stopped at the opening in the bank. He attempted to kick the creature, which promptly vanished. The next day, when he went back to the spot, he saw his own boot prints and the marks he had made when kicking at the cat, but of the cat's prints there was no trace. It was widely known that many years earlier, farm labourers had unearthed a human skeleton near the opening in the bank where the cat appeared. The bones were reburied where they were found, and the identity of the skeleton was never known. Could this be connected to the haunting? Apart from its many ghosts and legends, a very real phenomena can be seen in this part of the River Trent. A large tidal boar, also known as the Eiger, named after the Norse god of the sea, occurs at certain times of the year, and one of the best places to see it is here at Owerston Ferry.
This is Kingsley Street in the city of Lincoln, and it's the scene of a long-forgotten haunting. I am sure you will agree it's an unlikely setting for a ghost story, and I'm only aware of it because of a cutting from an unspecified magazine. The story is as follows. It was on the Tuesday, 5th of January 1932, that Mr. and Mrs. Foster and their 3 children first heard the faint sound of a bugle in their terraced home in Kingsley Street off Burton Road, Lincoln. Mr. Foster searched through all the rooms but could find neither instrument or player. The following evening the discordant notes returned, this time louder. Then on the Thursday the Fosters received some terrible news. Their aunt had committed suicide by swallowing disinfectant. Lucy Winter, 55, was disabled and had been depressed for some time. On the day of her suicide, she waited for her husband to go to work, then gulped down the poison. Her husband returned to the house in Delia Place, which used to stand off Broadgate, Lincoln, to find Lucy dead, her mouth burned and frothing. That night, across the city, the bugle sounded out in the Kingsley Street house, louder than ever. The Fosters were terrified. The sounds came again the following 3 nights, and the family, too scared to go to bed, took to sleeping huddled together in the living room. Friends and relatives who came to sit with them also heard the bugle. Some said it sounded like a few disjointed notes of the last post. On the Monday, the day of Mrs. Winter's funeral, all was silent, but the following night the phantom bugler was back, and on the Wednesday, even worse, it was accompanied by a rolling drum. An intrepid reporter covering the mystery for the Lincolnshire Echo was not a great believer in the supernatural. He noticed that in the ceiling of the passageway between the Fosters' house and their next-door neighbours there was a small hole. He suggested the notes were being produced by the wind, funnelled down the passageway through the hole and between the reeds. Once the hole had been filled in, the phantom bugler appears to have played his own last post. But did he? Some 30 years later, the Fosters' next-door neighbours began experiencing ghostly happenings. Cliff and Jean Hadfield claimed the spook would strip the bedding, move things around the house, open and close the letterbox, and even move the kitchen door from its hinges. They called the ghost Alf, and although he was a bit of a nuisance, the couple and their 3 children were never afraid of him. In 1963, the family emigrated to Australia, and apparently Alf went with them, still pestering them at their new home on the other side of the world. Were the 2 Kingsley Street hauntings connected? Did 2 families, by a remarkable coincidence, just happen to imagine it all? The questions remain unanswered.
There are possibly more haunted pubs in Britain than anywhere else in the world.
And the city of Lincoln has many old hostelries with many a strange legend and colourful history attached to them. For example, the pub directly behind me, the Strugglers Inn, has a rather macabre history.
The Strugglers Inn, situated next to Lincoln Castle in the Bailgate area of the city, dates back to 1841. The signboard depicts a man about to be hanged, which is a clue to the building's grisly history, because it was here at the Strugglers Inn where condemned prisoners held at Lincoln Castle were taken for one last drink before they were hanged on the roof of Cobb Hall, a tower on the northeast corner of Lincoln Castle. One of the prisoners brought to the Strugglers was William Clark, a poacher who had been sentenced to hang for murder. On the night of January the 30th, 1877, Clark and 3 other men were poaching in the woods, now known as Stapleford Woods, approximately 10 miles from Lincoln, when they were apprehended by gamekeeper Henry Walker and the landowner Charles Wells. They confronted the poachers, who turned and fled, apart from William Clark, who took aim and shot Henry Walker in the leg. Walker later died from his wounds, and Clark was tracked down to Lowestoft and brought back to Lincoln to stand trial for his murder. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. He was hanged in the castle courtyard by the famous Lincolnshire executioner William Marwood on the 26th of March 1877, and buried in the castle keep now known as Lucy Tower. Shortly before he was hanged, Clark was taken to the Strugglers Inn for one last drink, where he was followed by his faithful old lurcher dog. Once he had been hanged, the dog would turn up outside the pub, whining and scratching at the door, looking for its master, who would never return. Feeling sorry for the poor animal, Bob Roberts, the pub landlord, gave the lurcher a home, and when it died, he had it stuffed and mounted behind the bar, where it gazed at customers from out of a glass case for many years. Eventually, the curiosity was banished to the cellar until the late 1980s, when it was presented to the Castle Museum and put on display in the Old Victorian prison. However, according to some, the murderer's faithful old lurcher still resides at the Strugglers Inn. There have been reports of customers hearing ghostly scratching at the door, and some claim to have seen the apparition of a dog sat by the bar and sensed it brush past them, but on looking down, nothing is ever there. Well, that was my look at the gruesome history of the Strugglers Inn and just a few of the many ghostly tales from the county of Lincolnshire. Thank you for watching. As you know, I have explored many interesting and historical locations throughout the county, and I'll continue to bring you more stories of the strange and macabre from mysterious Lincolnshire.